Yes, you're good.
You guys hear me okay? All right. Fabulous. Yeah, I said thank you, Lord. What happened was that I wanted a speaker for a while, and I finally badgered my way onto the lineup. So it worked out pretty good. Anyway, this is a talk, Stronger Than Fear, Mental Health in the Developer Community. And if you're wondering who I am, I'm a dad. I'm a husband, I'm a developer type. I've been a web developer for about 20 years. I remember before Netscape had frames, and now many people wish it did not have frames again. But yeah, that was very exciting when Netscape 2 had frames. An occasional musician, I'm a big nerd. Local things that I don't usually get to say, that I grew up in St. Joe, Michigan, and I live in West Lafayette now. But in Indiana. But my brother went to Kalamazoo College here, got his undergrad here. I got accepted there, but I couldn't pay for it. But so there's a deep 20 years later resentment about that. I also have a mental illness, or I have a couple, maybe you might say. Now I'm just a person. I'm not a doctor, not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, or I don't have training in that kind of professionally, but I am certified in this thing called mental health first aid, which I'll mention in a little bit. But I'm just here to kind of talk about what it's like to deal with these kinds of things in the context of being a web developer, being a developer of any kind, and also to talk about how this kind of affects us on a larger scale, how it affects our industry, how it affects our workplaces. So I'm going to do a little plug because I'm here because the company I work for, Graph Story, which is your leading expert in graph databases. If you really are interested in that, I'll talk to you about it. But they let me take time off to come to conferences like this. I drove up here last night. I took the half a day off. They're incredibly supportive of me, and I couldn't be here without their support. A lot of companies don't do stuff like that, and it's really cool that they do. But I'm going to do a little informal survey. How many of you folks here wear glasses, or are there some kind of corrective lenses? All right. There's a few hypergenetic freaks here, but most of you have succumbed to the impending doom of death that follows us every moment. That's great, talking about a guy who passed away and now making jokes about it. That's really fucking cool. But yeah, now I'm curious, are you guys afraid to talk about it? Like tell people that you deal with this? Is anybody here afraid to say anything about it? So no, nobody raise their hands, despite the fact that you have to use this ocular crutch to get by in normal society. You have to have this device, this treatment, this procedure, an ongoing chronic disorder. It's not a disorder because most people have it, apparently. Have you ever had anybody, raise your hand if you have you ever had anybody regarding your decreased vision abilities say, hey, I think you're not trying hard enough? Or, instead of nobody did it, has anyone ever said, have you tried squinting? Maybe you can see the board. So no, we haven't done that, and that's typical. Most people aren't. A couple times people raise their hands when I say that, but no. Now, okay, so something a little more potentially dangerous in our society. Diabetes. I have a brother and my father also developed diabetes, so I'm kind of fucked. But it's something that is treatable. It's something that we deal with, that most people get by with proper care. And I'm curious, how many of you would be comfortable, maybe you don't bring it up the first thing you walk in, let's say in your workplace, would you be comfortable if the topic of diabetes came up, would you be comfortable discussing it? Raise your hand, please, if you would be comfortable. Would be comfortable, yes. All right. So most of us would be comfortable with that. All right. Now, another issue that I've had to deal with is I recently lost one of my brothers to cancer. And cancer is the thing that lots of us have to deal with. It's touched many or most of our lives. And it's not a topic that is fun to talk about, typically. But it comes up a lot in popular culture and media. It did used to be. But I'm curious, I'm going to ask the same question about that I asked about diabetes. How many of you would be comfortable, or at least okay, with talking about cancer in your workplace if it came up? Please raise your hand if you would be. If you wouldn't, that is perfectly okay. That is your decision and your choice on that. So I think that's interesting. Now, how many of you would be comfortable talking to your boss about a mental health issue? So a few of you, it's probably varies a little bit what you know. How about a colleague, somebody that you work with? So a few more. Or how about a friend or a family member? So a lot of you. Right, okay. So that's interesting. That's interesting. So I want you to think a little bit about that, about the differences about how we sort of care and treat those kinds of things and how we think about those things and how open we are and willing to discuss those kinds of things in this context while we're working through this. Now, I have my own diagnoses of these kinds of things that I deal with. I have two major diagnoses, or they call that comorbidity, which means that I will be killed twice. Does not mean that, it's a horrible word, just means you have two things. That's all it means. And I have generalized anxiety disorder. Quickly, I sort of have fight or flight reactions when it's not appropriate. I'll give you an example. An appropriate time would be when to have a fight or flight reaction is a lion is going to eat me. This is an appropriate reaction and one that we've evolved to have for survival purposes. An inappropriate reaction is I feel that way when I'm walking into a bar to meet friends by myself. Or another inappropriate one that I have had often is I essentially refuse to participate in public transportation because, for the most part, I don't understand how it works. And because I don't understand how it works, I'm so afraid that I'm going to fuck it up that I won't do it. Now, if I got a friend with me, if there's a buddy system going on, I'm okay. If I do it by myself, nope, I'm out. I use my phone, I get my, contract-only, semi-slave labor driver to come pick me up, and, do it that way, because that's the thing that I at least am sort of comfortable with. But other things, I'm afraid I'll fuck it up, and I won't do it. I won't do it. I also have adult ADHD. I keep saying adult ADHD. The reason is because when I was diagnosed, that's what it was called. Now they just call it ADHD. They used to think that it was different if you weren't a kid. I've had it since I was a kid, for sure, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was 27. So I oftentimes kind of have trouble focusing. I tend to avoid less appealing tasks. And I also tend to be very avoidant of things I don't want to do or make me uncomfortable. It ties in with the anxiety a lot. I have a really low frustration threshold, lower than many people do. My emotions tend to be intense when they come. They tend to come fast. And I'm really, really good at constructing possible bad outcomes and then hyper-focusing on them as if they are going to happen. So if I get and this ties in with the anxiety, of course, so if I get an email, let's say my boss contacts me late on Friday and says, hey, on Monday, could you come into my office to talk to me about it? Just need to catch up with you on something. I will assume that he's going to fire me. I'm going to lose my job. My family will be homeless because we can't pay for our house. All of these things will happen in this, terrible domino effect. And then I will worry about it as if those things are fait accompli, predicted, as the oracle said. And that is, of course, not. It very rarely happens that I've gotten fired like that. But it does happen. No, it doesn't. But does it ever? No, not in that way, at least. So, anyway, so I take medication for this stuff. I take about 4 different medications every day that I have to take. I take these things. I also see a therapist about every couple of weeks. And I talk about stuff where I try to figure out why I do the things that I do. Why do I have the reactions that I have? Break those things down and try to come up with strategies to address those things. That's the main purpose of the kinds of treatment that I get. So both chemical therapies and psychological therapies. Now, it impacts my work every day. This is not something, for me, it's a chronic issue. For some people, it isn't. But for me, it's a chronic issue. I deal with it every day. Some days are better than others, despite the fact I'm always taking my meds and stuff like that. Some days are better than others. Now, sometimes it gives me superpowers, and it's awesome, and it absolutely is a big reason why I am good at what I do. Without a doubt. I'm good at a lot of aspects of my job because my brain works the way it does. I'm really good at things like anticipating issues quickly. I'm really good at pattern matching, and human beings have pattern matching brains. That was one of the things we're really good at. And I think I'm faster to make connections than a lot of people. I don't know, just works out that way. So I'm able to be like, well, if we do this, this might be a consequence down the road from that. I have to think about that, and I tie those things together pretty quickly. So I'm able to anticipate things like security issues or UI issues, or how does, what flexibilities that give us or what does it not. I tend to, and going through this stuff, I tend to be a person who empathizes easily with people and what their experiences are like. So I tend to empathize with users very well, and that's usually the point of what we're actually doing, is to make tools that people use and get things done with them. So that stuff is really helpful, and those are things that I've found that comparatively, I'm better at those things than many people are. Not the best, but those are some things that I do really well. And then sometimes it absolutely ruins me. Sometimes I feel completely alone, I feel completely incompetent, my emotions get out of control, and I feel that I cannot accomplish anything. It completely craters my day, and I want to hide in a hole, and I don't want to ever leave. I just feel utterly alone. That feeling that, why is it that everybody else can cope in society, and they seem to get along okay, and they seem to be able to do from school? Why is it other people don't seem to have the problems getting their homework done that I do? Why is it that, in college it was such a struggle for me to take, any kind of course load, like a 15-hour course load, like I couldn't handle. There was too much stuff to balance. And why was it that I would go through periods where I'd have a week where I got nothing done, and then I would have 3 days where I got a ton of shit done? Why was it like that? And if I could just focus, I could get so much stuff done, I could be so much better at everything, but I'm not, and I'm broken, and I'm just fucked, and I can't exist in this world. I don't work with it. And that's how I felt. And sometimes I still do feel that way. The thing is, there's actually a ton of people like this. A ton of people have those kinds of experiences. And this is what I'm trying to fight, and this is what we're trying to fight with this open source mental illness stuff that we're working on. I want to look a little bit about how it affects us sort of as a society, as a culture, as a, outside just the tech industry. But generally in the United States, most studies you see will peg the number of people who are dealing with a mental health issue of some kind at about 1 in 5 per year. So it's fairly safe to say that in any given population, probably at least 20% of the people are dealing with what would qualify, however you want to make that threshold of qualification is, it would qualify as people who are dealing with a mental health disorder that could be helped with treatment and things like that. 1 out of 5 people. So, are we abnormal? Am I actually that super weird? Actually, not really. It's pretty common. In fact, anxiety disorders are the most common in the general population. The World Health Organization in 2004 did a study called, it was about the global burden of disease. And they had this metric called disease burden, which is basically premature death and years lived with a disability. So the idea is that how does it impact a society, not just on the number of deaths it causes, but on also how it's the impact it has on interfering with what we would call day-to-day normal life in a given society, in a given culture. And in that study, and this is the most recent one they did, is because it's global, so it's a little bit older, but I think it still probably holds pretty true. They said that the burden of mental disorders was the largest of all disorder categories in North America That's more than cardiovascular disease, and that's more than cancer. And I'll quote from the study. In all regions, neuropsychiatric conditions are the most important causes of disability, accounting for around 1/3 of years lost to disability among adults aged 15 years and over. That is an enormous impact globally on all societies, on all demographics. You can look a little bit at the economic cost. Mental health conditions, the second leading cause of workplace absenteeism. If we're just looking in workplaces, this is in the US. So workers with depression lose almost a day per week. Workers without it, and we're just talking about depression. And workers without lose a significantly smaller number of work days per week that they're not in. And if you add up these numbers are always a little fuzzy when you're trying to measure economic costs of this stuff. So take it with a little bit of grain of salt. You can look at that PDF if you want to see how they come up with these numbers. But depression, just depression, which is not the most common mental health disorder, but it is about the second most. $43.7 billion in absenteeism from work, lost productivity and direct treatment. Enormous economic costs because of these things. Now, I work in tech, and particularly also in open source stuff. I've been doing that for a long time. Most of my career. I had no plan. I just fucked around and got good at it, and it worked out for me. So, but that's sort of the culture I know. That's the tribe I know, whatever, right? So, now we're doing a new survey right now, which I'd encourage you guys to take. I'll give you a minute. But in 2014, in September 2014, we did a survey, mental health and tech. And I'm only going to show you results from 3 questions from that. It's a lot more detailed stuff. We have all the data up if you want to look at it. So 3 questions that we asked that I think tell an interesting story about the state of how mental health is considered in tech right now in the workplace. So this is asking folks, how many respondents did we have? You know, I was self-employed. I think it was about 600 or 700 people here. We had about 1,100 total respondents. For this year, for the 2016 one, which is still ongoing, we're over 1,100 responses for that. So let's ask this question. Do you think that discussing a health issue with your employer would have negative consequences? And we asked that about physical, and we asked that about mental health issues. Physical health issues, 3/4 said no. There would not be a negative consequence for discussing it. Some said maybe it depends on what that physical issue is. Maybe it depends on what kind of job it is. It used to be that you'd get a sysadmin job. They call it DevOps now. So those of you who don't know what the sysadmin is, like what they call DevOps now. And sometimes you had to, because it wasn't all virtualized, you had to carry like 60-pound CRT monitors and stuff like that. So you had to be you must lift up to 75 pounds and stuff like that. It was in the job description. Now monitors are virtualized, so it's not a thing. So physical, very low. Only 4% said yes. Only 19 said maybe. Now let's look at mental health issues. Only 1/3 could say no, no negative consequence. 1/4 said yes. And 1/3, more than that, 40%, 2/5 said maybe. Maybe there would be a negative consequence for bringing it up. Significantly higher numbers. Orders of magnitude higher numbers. This is the thing I get asked about a lot when people come talk to me directly about stuff. They talk about the interview process. So I asked this question, would you bring up a health issue with a potential employer in an interview? Again, we asked about physical and mental health, and I want you to think about that in the context of the discussion we had at the beginning. Physical health, 44% said no. Why bring it up? Probably, it may not impact your job. It may be something that you just don't want to give somebody any reason to shoot you down. Maybe it was 44%, yes was 12%. Would you bring it up 12%? Let's look at mental health then. Yes is 2%. No is twice as many. Maybe is only 14%. I want to point out, just so you know, it is illegal to not hire someone on the basis of disability, mental or physical, as long as it does not interfere with their ability to do the job when reasonable accommodations are given. An employer is required to give you reasonable accommodations. Now, it is intentionally vague in the Americans with Disability Act. However, it is very clear that most of us are afraid to talk about this, particularly mental health issues, because we're afraid that we will be discriminated against and not get a job because of it. Does your employer provide resources to learn more about mental health issues and how to seek help? Only a quarter said yes. Almost 40% said no. Almost 40% said don't know. So what kind of job are we what kind of job are we doing in educating people about the resources they do have? Oh, and I lied. No, that was the last one. I didn't lie. It was 3 questions. But the key thing here is that sick workers don't work, or they're significantly less productive. And that's just the way it is. And it doesn't matter how they're sick. Health is health. We heard that before lunch. Health is health. But there's a lot of people who will try to throw a load of shit at you and say that, well, this isn't real, or you should just deal with it, or you should just muck up. You should be able to deal with 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. That shouldn't be a big deal. Well, that's what you've got to do to work here. You're not a culture fit if you can't do that. Those people don't give a flying fuck about you. They care about getting their stuff done, and they are willing to sacrifice your health for that. And I think it is embarrassing and shameful that we allow that to be tolerated in this industry. But change is really hard. I don't think most people are malicious about this, but change is hard. People get scared. They're scared to say anything. They don't know the right things to do, even if they want to help people. They don't know, what should I do? What are going to be the legal consequences if I say the wrong thing? What happens to the business? Maybe they're getting advised by HR or their lawyers to keep their mouths shut and not deal with it. Might be afraid of endangering their workplace. People are going to be afraid of losing their jobs. Now, some of the things we do with OSMI, we're trying to change that. We're trying to give real documentation. And one of the things I'm excited about is next week, which is, that's the Mental Health Awareness Month starts next month in May. And we're going to release 3 documents that guide you in applying the ADA for mental health issues in tech, and also a document that guides folks on how to create supportive workplaces. I can't go into a whole bunch of detail. I'd be here a long time about it. But I can tell you 3 things that you can do. Just kind of general things to think about. How many of you here are team leads or executives? Okay, please listen to this, because you establish the culture for everybody who works with you. It is very key that you consider that when looking at this stuff, because honestly, the onus is on you. It is very difficult to change culture from bottom up. The first thing I strongly suggest, and I've taken this myself, is to take a course called Mental Health First Aid. It's in 22 different countries. I've taken, of course, the US version of it. I paid $50 for a 1-day course that included a delightful box lunch. And it doesn't teach you how to diagnose people, and it doesn't teach you how to solve their problems for them, which is not what you want to try to do anyway. But what it does is it teaches you how to identify people who are potentially in a mental health crisis or otherwise need help, and how to interact with them, to listen empathetically, to ask the right kinds of questions in order to encourage and enable them to seek help. That is the whole reason you want to take this course, is to enable people to seek help. Because most people are afraid, they're scared, they don't know what their options are, and they may be afraid of going down that road, period. The inertia to overcome it is enormous. This helps you learn how to do that in an effective way. The second thing is talk about it. It doesn't mean that you have to be like me, and my therapist says I have a confessional personality. And so, which is 100% accurate. For somebody who has generalized anxiety disorder and stuff, I like go ahead and talk about myself all the time, right? But when I say I want you to tell people to talk openly, that doesn't mean brag it to the whole world, but it means maybe bring it up to your friends that you're going to go take this class. Maybe take a damn selfie that says, hey, here I am taking this course. Maybe it says you mentioned something about it. You know, maybe there's a story in the media about somebody who has suffered with mental health issues or things like that. And you maybe post about it and you express empathy for them. You don't try to figure out what was wrong with them, but you say, boy, that must be hard. Even if they're a celebrity or whatever and their life is supposed to be awesome because they've got a lot of money. No, it doesn't really make a difference. So talk about this stuff openly. Brag about the stuff that you're doing, like taking this course or things like that. Talk about it on Twitter or Facebook and, you know, all those kinds of things. Do what you can and what you feel comfortable with. If you can push that edge a little bit. Not saying you gotta be the spearhead, but push that envelope a little bit in terms of what you're willing to talk about. Because we didn't used to be willing to talk about cancer publicly. We didn't used to be willing to talk about women being pregnant publicly. That was a shameful thing 50, 60 years ago. It's indiscreet. We sure as hell can change this, too. And at the end of it, it's making a commitment to change. It's deciding to do what you gotta do to make that change. And you gotta do that in yourself. To change yourself and change some of the ways that you maybe think about those things, the way that you interact, the way, maybe it might be, maybe I don't make one joke. Look, I make a lot of jokes. I say, that guy's fucking crazy all the time. So I'm not gonna be a poster child for, watching your language about shit. But it's making a commitment to being empathetic, to considering those possibilities, and considering what it's like to be in different kinds of situations. To change yourself, making a commitment to do that. And by doing that, change that world around you. So many people in tech, it seems like they want to go work at a place that's like, well, if you do, you're going to work on something that 1 million people use, or 50 million people use, and that's super attractive to people. I don't know, man. I think that, the impact that you could have just on the people who are in your social group. You can change their lives and their world in just subtle ways, but in ways that impact them so positively. And this is a huge way to do that, to make them feel not ashamed to talk about this, to maybe make them feel okay with calling somebody up and saying, hey, can I get an appointment to do an evaluation? Or maybe if you see somebody who's having that trouble, say, look, I know this is scary, I'd be willing to give that call for you. I'll call and set it up if you want. And is that hard? Should we be scared of that? I don't think so. Your workplace is a social group you probably spend the most time with. You probably spend more time there than with anybody else in your life. So what kind of group that is has an enormous impact on us. Our workplace is also the primary conduit for healthcare, so that it has an enormous impact on us. So, okay, what's the upside other than just being not an evil human being? Actually, just being a good person and giving a shit. Why try to change the workplace? Why does that make a difference? Well, because it benefits everybody and it benefits the organization and everyone in it. Because mental wellness means better employees. Period. End of story. There's no period up there, but that it is the end of this. Imagine this is a language with no semicolons, like some of you savages who use Python and shit like that. Coffee script. What the hell is it? But employees who feel valued and secure, work more effectively when their employers demonstrate a commitment to their well-being. You demonstrate that, they'll climb walls. They'll run through fucking tanks, metaphorically. They will do all sorts of stuff if they believe you give a shit about them. Demonstrate your values. This gives you an opportunity to demonstrate those values publicly as an organization. If you want to embrace diversity, that includes embracing people who live with mental health issues. And in becoming more inclusive, businesses both thrive, there's good evidence for this, not just me talking a bunch of shit, and set a standard for others. And in that, in demonstrating that, people want to work for you. Because they say, that's a company that maybe gives a shit about me, that maybe cares about me as an individual and doesn't view me as just a resource. I hate that language where we call people resources. I think it is devaluing and it is reductive. And I think we have to be very careful about our language. I think intent has a lot to do with that. And I don't dismiss. I think their intent obviously has to weigh into that. But I would really like it if we called people human beings and not resources. More people want to work someplace that respects them fully, that does not ignore their well-being. So I need your help with this. I've got slides and videos and resources up at osmihelp.org. We've been building this the last 3 years, and it's really starting to take off. I'm really excited. Like, say next week, we're going to do a big release of these documents that are just awesome. And I've gotten such great help from people like Jennifer Kulian, Joanna Wu, other volunteers who've been helping us out massively with this. If you want to take the survey I'm talking about for 2016, it's the 2016 Mental Health Tech Survey, J.MP OSME Survey 2016. You can go there, you can take it, it is anonymous, it takes you about 15 minutes. Now, Mike said something about a 6-word challenge, and he was like, would you say something about it? Because I did this work and I wanted to, he wants to make it cool. So he gave you this challenge, and he says, describe your life in 6 words. And I'm like, bro, that's pretty heavy, man. I don't know, that's a tough one. Of course, I had to think about it and be profound and shit like that. Maybe that should have been it. I have to be profound. Shit. Maybe that should have been it. But, this used to be a talk where I talk more about the stuff that I deal with, and it's less now because I want to take it. I ain't got 2 hours to do this, right? I'm over time already. But what I said was in this, by helping others, I saved myself. And that's just what I keep trying to do. I lost my brother like a year ago. I'm the last of 9 kids, and in the past 3 years, I lost 2 of my brothers. My brother Brian and my brother Jim. And Jim was this guy who, just by being who he was, he made everybody feel better around him. Like, sometimes I feel like I'm like him, but that's like 10% of the time. And I also have the stuff where I'm just a fucking grumpy motherfucker all the time. And I am dark and I'm moody, and so in some ways I'm more like Brian was. But I know we don't have a lot of time here. And the best thing I can do to honor both of them is to keep doing this. So I really appreciate you taking the time and taking this seriously so that we can help each other. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Like I said, my link's up there. There's a lot of people who are helping me out with this stuff. Thank you so much for everything. If you check it out, you can contact me online, the OSMI Help Twitter handle, and that's what I got. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You know Elizabeth Naramore, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Elizabeth Naramore, I think you may have exceeded the number of curse words in a Kalamazoo conference talk that was said by Elizabeth 2-3 years ago. And impossible. And you also made me cry like a baby like she did. So,